Woohoo! Let's do this. The great haberdasher took him in tow at once, even going so far as to rest two of his plump fingers upon the visionary's arm. Sam's heart so warmed to the man's kind tone that as he talked to him, he felt for the second time that day the sensation of tears mounting to his eyes. Mr. Wallop told him that it was his father's birthday and that in honor of this anniversary, he was on his way to take tea with Mrs. Legg. "You know the house," he said. "It is called Camelot." And he invited Sam to follow him to this auspicious domicile. "She'll be overjoyed to see you, sir," he asseverated again and again. "Overjoyed she'll be. And there'll be nobody there but we two. Three's company, you know, sir, and two's a morality, as my old dad used to say. She'll be ravaged with what you saw, sir, just as I am. Ravaged." By degrees, under the redoubtable companionship of the friendly draper, Sam's wits began to grow a little less ensorcerized, and by the time they reached the aged procuress's house, his pulses were beating to a rhythm that was nearly normal. Behold him now, therefore, this girl betrayer and child deserter, this, to quote Zoyland's subsequent comments upon Sam's behavior, this double-dyed idiot and arch-prig, seated at Mother Legg's mahogany table, under the staring eyes of the smug recorders, drinking tea, with a touch of Bridgewater punch superadded, and eating buttered scones. He was ravenously hungry. For the black spaniel, refusing to touch the only raw meat he could procure for it, had swallowed with gusto every scrap of bread and treacle he had prepared for himself. And as he ate and drank, and as the strong and delicately doctored tea warmed his blood, his tongue became unloosened as it had rarely been unloosened in his life before. The rapturous happiness that thrilled him was not, at least not at all of it, directly due to his sight of the Holy Grail. It was undoubtedly partly due, but this itself was an indirect result of this vision, to some new adjustment of his soul and his body. For his soul was no longer an external soul. Yes, it no longer stood apart by the side of his flesh, issuing categorical mandates. And indeed he felt now as if Mother Legg's very tea, Bridgewater punch and all, was nourishing both his soul and his body. As his words flowed on, describing every detail of his great experience, he was surprised to find himself using words and phrases that he had made use of on that occasion on the top of the Tor, when he had defended the Incarnation against the Manichean doctrines of Mr. Evans. He could even feel under his fingers the grass roots that had plucked up that morning, nearly a year ago, in the sudden outburst of inspiration. His conception of the thing was very different now, for his personal Christ had vanished. But with that curious pride and consistency that even holy men feel, he began glossing over this difference, as if a gardener, when a viola cartoonist comes up where he had planted pansies, were to insist it is the same, and use his ancient rigmarole on the beauty of pansies for this totally new growth. But there may have entered into his eloquence at this point some slight stammering and hesitation which gave the aged procuress her cue. "What warrants a simple old bitch like me," protested Mother Legg, "is how an atheist, like you say you are, Holy Sam, could see the blood of the Blessed One, when there ain't, and never had been, no Blessed One to bleed." Mr. Wallop glanced cautiously round the big apartment and looked with some nervousness at the heavy black curtains. "What a man do see," he remarked sententiously, "be one thing. What a man do think he sees be another. But what a man do say he sees be a proper knockout. The mistress here have seed me poor old dad, rest his merry soul, raised up in a wishing her for no good purpose in her beauty sleep. But that don't mean that the old gent really comes out from the grave. Do it, marm." He kept his eyes on those black curtains of the late Kitty Camel's reception room, as if he greatly preferred that the elder Mr. Wallop should remain quiescent where he had been laid in the Wells Road graveyard. "Were't like my silver bowl when he seed it, Holy Sam?" inquired the old lady, settling her pretentious frame more comfortably in her tall, straight-backed chair and raising her teacup to her lips. Sam's little green eyes shone radiantly. "It wasn't like anything on earth," he cried. "And the moment I saw it, I knew what it was. Everything will be different from now on, with the GRAIL come back to Glastonbury. It was a pure accident that I was the one who saw it first. But I'm going all round town today, telling everybody about it. And I expect hundreds of people will see it. I expect even the visitors will see it. Well, that handsome young man in me shop, what I've seen as such troubles with, the one that what reads Nietzsche in Arden is ert when he gets the gals in trouble. See the Holy Grail? To Arden is art. Nietzsche to Arden is art. Arden is heart. Okay. It would be difficult to believe that Mr. Wallop was not being facetious unless you were seated opposite him and saw the guileless stare in his round eyes. The old procuress was much less guileless. Indeed, she was positively clairvoyant in the subtle penetration of her next question. "Have the vision what you've been privileged with, Holy Sam, made you forget the torments what the Saviour did bear for we poor sinners?" This question of the aged woman, and it may well be that in the course of her long life as the purveyor of the sweets of sin, she had acquired a diabolical insight, did assuredly hit Sam between the joints of his armor. But the cresting wave of excitement in which he rode was so great that he answered without a second's hesitation. "If you or your friends here," he said, "had gone through unspeakable pains for anyone you loved, and those pains had been turned into heavenly wine and heavenly bread, wouldn't you feel it ungrateful in the person not to take and eat, not to take and drink and be filled with gratitude to you?" It was natural enough when Sam left the hospitable domain of Mother Legg, that he should find himself inevitably drifting towards the vicarage. But he restrained himself from entering, and in place of that, went on a sudden impulse up the drive of the Abbey House. It can be imagined what a shock it was to him when, having rung at the front door, he was informed by Lily that Miss Drew was not at home. "But, Lily, my good girl, where is she if she isn't at home? She's always at home on Sunday afternoons." "She's been at home on Sunday afternoons, reading the Guardian before tea and looking at the Illustrated London News after tea, from days before you and I were born. Come now, Lily, what is it? What's up? Is she sick? Is she lying down? I've got something to tell her. Something very important. Something that would interest you and Louis, too." Pestered in that way by a gentleman she had familiarly known as Mr. Sam, since the days when she wore even shorter frocks than were the present fashion, Lily broke down, and with tears in her eyes, confessed the sorrowful truth. The truth, namely, that Miss Drew had decided in the interest of public virtue never to have him in her home again. Wow. "She's been to see Mr. Decker, too," Lily went on, after a glance over her shoulder to make certain that the drawing-room door was closed. "And Mr. Weatherwax says he heard her, through the study window, storming at your dad, Mr. Sam, like she was St. Dunstan scolding Satan. Mr. Weatherwax says he heard her tell your dad that she'd write to the Lord Bishop in his palace at Wells and tell him that Glastonbury Vicarage was becoming an asylum for fallen women." Sam hardly listened to the latter part of the revelation. He was thinking to himself, "Such news as I've got for the people of Glastonbury oughtn't to be confined to masters and mistresses. Lily is a good girl, a romantic girl, and she'll be thrilled to hear any news. I've always thought there was a dreamy expression in her eyes that showed she was... I've had a great experience, Lily, he began. And that was what I came to talk to Miss Drew about. It was yesterday it happened. I may as well tell you if Miss Drew won't see me. I was down by the river, Lily, and I saw distinctly... But Lily interrupted him. Another time, Mr. Sam, another time, if you please. I'm sure you saw something very nice, but I've got to shut the door now. Louie wants to go to the Methodist chapel tonight, and she's going to dress now, and I've got to lay the supper. Mrs. has asked Miss Crummy to supper, so please excuse me. She gave him one of her most dim, beguiling, and tender smiles. A smile that seemed to say, life is more full of romance than a simple gentleman like you can possibly know. Even Louie, when she goes to the Methodist chapel with Bob Tankerville. But at this point, she firmly closed the door. Although Sam was quite in the dark about Miss Drew's new interest in Crummy, the truth was that as Mary slipped away from her, the lonely woman had begun to find not a little consolation in the spell that the beauty of Mr. Gurd's daughter had already cast over her. Sam couldn't help smiling as he mentally envisaged the beautiful Crummy seated opposite her entertainer and listening sweetly to her well-chosen words across the silver candlesticks. But this piece of news set him off in Crummy's direction. I'll be with Nell and Father tonight, he thought. But I'll go to the Gurds now. I'll catch her easily before she starts, if I hurry up. He retraced his steps down Silver Street, and soon reached the High Street near St. John's Church. A small group of people were just coming out from an afternoon's christening, and the first person Sam encountered was Mrs. Philip Crowe, who, under the advice of Emma, who assured her that Mr. Decker be more hisself when he be preaching to godfathers and godmothers than when 'tis the common crowd, had attended this brief and pleasant service. Tilly shook hands with him cordially, for the gossip retailed by Emma was of a much more detailed and much more authentic kind than that conveyed to Miss Drew's ears by Mr. Weatherwax. And it excited Tilly's particular type of sympathy to think of this quiet young man living by himself in the old malt house. He's made a mistake and he's sorry for it, she thought, and vaguely in her mind she dreamed that it would be nice one day if she and Emma could clear up that top floor for this well-meaning youth who had no wife and no servant. You must have heard good news, Mr. Decker, Tilly said, for your eyes are shining. They shone like that when you were a boy and Philip and I were giving you your first party at the Elms. I recall it clearly, because it was when Emma had just come to us, and I thought she did so well when the dog we had then... We've never had a dog since, Mr. Decker, but I was weak then, and silly about Philip. And Philip was fond of dogs, and what was I saying? Made a sad mess in the dining room. Mrs. Crowe, said Sam, staring at the lavender fringe of the bookmarker which dangled from the large prayer book she carried, and then letting his gaze move to their two shadows, with the declining sun caused to extend clean across the street, and which resembled a child's drawing of two fantastic dolls. Mrs. Crowe, I have something to tell you that I will interest you. Oh dear, she cried. Don't look so wild, and don't tell me any of your secrets. I've never said one word to anyone about you and Mrs. Zoyland, and I'd rather not hear anything. Oop. There came over Sam just then a desire to laugh aloud. That no one in this town could be brought even to listen to what he had seen seemed like a crazy dream. He felt as if he were living in two worlds at the same time. And one of them, by far the less real and by far the most absurd, was trying to convince him that the other was a fantasy. And that's the Grail for today. See you again next time. Today's Glastonbury brought to you by the Community College of Rhode Island. Hope is her motto in 1964. 825-2285 is their number. Cheers.